How childhood without affection shaped your adult life. Have you ever noticed how some people grow up apologizing for existing? They speak too quietly, take up little space, avoid bothering. On the outside they look strong or independent. Inside, they carry an emotional emptiness that is difficult to explain. The truth is that many of them were an emotionally neglected child and learned early on that their emotions were not a priority. Child emotional neglect leaves no visible bruises. It does not appear in old photos. It doesn't make headlines. It is silent. It's the childhood without affection where no one asked, "What are you feeling?" It is when pain is not validated, when fear is minimized, and when joy does not find an echo. And what was not said. It hurts as much as what was done. Maybe you carry a chronic loneliness that doesn't make sense. He is surrounded by people, but he feels invisible. As if there were an emotional invisibility that accompanies every relationship. This is not weakness. It's not drama. And it's definitely not because there's something wrong with you. In this video, you'll understand how childhood wounds shape low self-esteem, insecure attachment, and difficulty connecting in adulthood and, more importantly, how to start a real process of emotional healing through self-compassion and reparenting. Because maybe what you call loneliness is just a misunderstood story waiting to be resignified. Many people who have experienced childhood emotional neglect grow up thinking that the best way to exist is not much exists. They say little in meetings, avoid conflict, apologize even when someone bumps into them. It's as if they carry an invisible manual saying, "Don't bother." The emotionally neglected child learns early on that his emotions don't matter, so in adulthood, he shrinks to fit into the space he believes he deserves. The problem is that this emotional invisibility does not disappear on its own. It becomes standard. At work, the person accepts less than he deserves. In relationships, he tolerates emotional crumbs. In friendship, it is always the one who listens, but rarely the one who is heard. On the outside it looks like maturity. Inside, it's an emotional emptiness that echoes the old childhood without affection. And you know the most curious? Many of these people are extremely sensitive and perceptive. They develop this skill as a survival mechanism. Silence has become a strategy, self-control has become armor. But living like this feeds chronic loneliness and reinforces low self-esteem. And that's precisely where the question that leads to the next step begins. How did this pain manage to become so invisible even to those who carry it? When we talk about neglect, many people immediately think of physical abandonment, lack of food, or total absence of parents. But children's emotional neglect is more subtle and, precisely for this reason, more difficult to recognize. It happens when the child has his emotional needs ignored, minimized, or treated as exaggeration. It's not about what happened. It's about what never happened. Maybe you've heard phrases like "that's nothing," "stop crying," "swallow your tears," "you're too sensitive." Gradually, the emotionally neglected child learns that feeling is wrong or inconvenient. And so emotional invisibility is born. Emotions exist, but they do not find a safe space to be welcomed. The pain is not validated, so it begins to be hidden. The big difference between physical and emotional neglect is that the latter leaves no concrete evidence. For this reason, many adults doubt their own childhood wounds. They think, "But my parents did what they could." And they probably did. But the absence of intention does not cancel out the impact. And when this understanding begins to emerge, it opens up space to see something even deeper: how much the lack of validation has shaped who you have become. Every child needs something simple but powerful to feel seen. Not just fed or clothed, but understood. When an emotion arises, fear, sadness, joy, frustration, it needs an adult who says, with genuine presence, "I'm here. I get it. Without this validation, the emotionally neglected child begins to believe that there is something wrong with what they feel. Imagine a boy who falls, hurts his knee, and hears, "That was nothing." Or a girl who says she's sad and hears, "You have everything, there's no reason for this." The implicit message is clear: your emotions are exaggerated. Over time, this childhood without emotionally validated affection builds a fragile foundation of self-esteem. The child learns to doubt his own perception. And when this validation doesn't happen repeatedly, an insecure attachment pattern is formed. The person grows up trying to guess what others expect of him, seeking approval to make up for what he lacked. Low self-esteem is not born out of nowhere, it is cultivated in the absence of healthy emotional mirrors. And it is precisely this absence that leads us to understand why silence becomes such a powerful strategy. When validation does not come, the child does not confront the system, he adapts. And one of the most common adaptations in the face of children's emotional neglect is silence. Not because she doesn't feel it, but because she realizes that feeling out loud doesn't bring acceptance. So she swallows her tears, disguises her fear, and learns to be strong ahead of time. This silence is not weakness, it is survival emotional intelligence. The emotionally neglected child observes the environment, understands what generates approval and what generates rejection. If expressing sadness brings indifference, it represses. If showing anger causes punishment, she internalizes it. This is how the construction of emotional emptiness begins. Emotions exist, but they are locked inside. The problem is that what was useful in childhood becomes an obstacle in adult life. The person grows up with difficulty naming what they feel, develops chronic loneliness even when accompanied, and reinforces emotional invisibility in relationships. The silence that once protected now isolates. And this brings us to a delicate point: what happens when this loneliness ceases to be circumstantial and becomes permanent? There is a huge difference between being alone and feeling chronic loneliness. The first is circumstantial, the second is structural. Those who have experienced childhood emotional neglect often carry the persistent feeling of not belonging, even surrounded by people. It's like being at a lively party, smiling on the outside, but with a quiet emotional emptiness on the inside. This loneliness is neither drama nor exaggeration. It is born from childhood without validated affection, where the emotional connection was not built safely. The emotionally neglected child grows up learning to fend for himself emotionally. Result: difficulty trusting, fear of depending, fear of being vulnerable. Insecure attachment comes into play and keeps relationships on the surface. And hey, raise something practical: start by observing your patterns. Do you avoid asking for help? Do you minimize what you feel? Do you find yourself thinking, "No one really knows me"? A simple exercise is to write down 3 emotions you have felt throughout the day daily without judgment. It may seem basic, but it's the beginning of reparenting, learning to offer yourself the validation you lacked. And when we start doing that, we realize that this loneliness has deeper roots than we imagined. Here comes a delicate but liberating part: many parents who practiced child emotional neglect were also an emotionally neglected child. They didn't wake up one day deciding to ignore feelings, they simply never learned to deal with their own. And no one offers what they have never received. The problem is not malice, it is unconscious repetition. Imagine someone who grew up in a childhood without affection, where emotions were seen as weakness. When becoming a parent, this person can even provide for everything materially, but it freezes when the child cries, gets frustrated, or shows fear. Emotional invisibility perpetuates itself without anyone noticing. The cycle continues, not by intention, but by lack of awareness. Understanding this is not to wipe out or invalidate your childhood wounds. It is to gain clarity. Because when you see the pattern, you stop personalizing the pain as your fault. Low self-esteem is beginning to be questioned. the emotional emptiness begins to be contextualized. And it is at this point that a powerful question arises whether patterns can be inherited, can also be stopped. When children's emotional neglect sets in, the child does not stop feeling. He creates characters, masks, strategies. Some have become the exemplary perfectionist, the one who believes that if he does everything right, he will finally be seen. Others choose total invisibility. The less it takes up space, the lower the risk of rejection. And then there is the rebel, who transforms the emotional emptiness into constant opposition. The perfectionist tries to make up for childhood without affection with impeccable performance. But, deep down, each achievement is accompanied by the feeling that it is never enough. Low self-esteem remains hidden behind diplomas and goals fulfilled. The invisible, on the other hand, reinforces the emotional invisibility learned early, observes everything, participates little, feels a lot but almost never shares. The rebel, on the other hand, seems strong, but often carries childhood wounds as deep as the others. He challenges because, back then, he was not heard. All of these masks are responses to an insecure attachment and desperate need for connection. And the question that begins to emerge is uncomfortable but liberating: who would you be without the mask you learned to wear to survive? When child emotional neglect happens repeatedly, the child does not conclude, "My needs were not met." She concludes, "There's something wrong with me." This is the silent distortion that sets in. The emotionally neglected child internalizes guilt, because it is less painful to believe that the problem is in oneself than to admit that the environment has failed. Over time, this narrative becomes identity. Low self-esteem is no longer a passing feeling and becomes a permanent lens. The person enters a relationship already expecting to be abandoned. He receives a compliment and is suspicious. She makes a small mistake and confirms to herself, "I knew it." Emotional emptiness is interpreted as a personal defect, and not as a consequence of a childhood without validated affection. But here begins an important turnaround. When you recognize that this self-image was built in a context of emotional invisibility and insecure attachment, something changes. Guilt begins to give way to understanding. And understanding paves the way for emotional healing. Because maybe you've never been too hard, maybe you've just been a kid trying to be seen. Here's something that perhaps no one has told you clearly: you're not broke. The marks of children's emotional neglect are deep, yes, but they are not sentences. The brain is plastic, moldable. Neuroplasticity shows that new emotional experiences can literally rearrange internal connections. That is, what has been learned can also be relearned. The emotionally neglected child has developed insecure attachment patterns and defense mechanisms to survive. But the conscious adult can choose something different. Emotional healing begins when you acknowledge your childhood wounds without reducing yourself to them. It's not about erasing the past, it's about reinterpreting it with maturity and self-compassion. A practical step? Seek knowledge. Books such as The Body Keeps the Marks by Bessel van der Kolk or The Courage to Be Imperfect by Brené Brown help to understand that emotional emptiness is not a character flaw. Therapy is also a powerful tool for reparenting. And when you realize that there are possible paths, a new question arises: how to rebuild the internal connection that was interrupted back then? If childhood emotional neglect has taught you to ignore what you feel, emotional healing starts by doing just the opposite: paying attention. It sounds simple, but it is not. The emotionally neglected child grew up disconnected from his own internal world. So the first step is to develop emotional literacy, learning to name what you feel without judgment. Start small. At the end of the day, ask yourself, what did I feel today? Not what happened, but what you felt. Sadness? Frustration? Contained joy? Anxiety? Name emotions as if you were helping a child understand his or her own heart. This is a straightforward exercise in reparenting. You become the adult who validates what was previously ignored. Another powerful practice is to replace automatic self-criticism with self-compassion. When you make a mistake, instead of thinking "I'm a disaster," try "I'm learning." It may seem strange at first. After all, low self-esteem has been trained for years. But each time you do that, you begin to fill the emotional void with conscious presence. And this internal reconnection sets the stage for something even more transformative: secure relationships. There is something profoundly transformative about experiencing, in adulthood, what was lacking in childhood: a secure attachment. Relationships where you can say what you feel without fear of being ridiculed. Where silence is not punishment. Where vulnerability does not become a weapon. For those who have experienced childhood emotional neglect, this may seem almost too good to be true. In the beginning, it is common for the internal system to be suspicious. The emotionally neglected child learned that showing emotions led to emotional invisibility or rejection. So, when someone really listens, welcomes and validates, the body is strange. It's as if the brain says, "This is not familiar." But it is precisely this repeated experience that begins to reconfigure patterns of insecure attachment. A concrete practice is to observe how you react when someone shows genuine care. Do you minimize it? Change the subject? Are you joking? Instead, try simply saying, "Thank you for listening to me." It may seem small, but it is huge. Secure relationships, whether friendships, therapy, or a love partnership, work as a laboratory for emotional healing. And when that security begins to take hold, something even deeper happens: you stop running away from your own presence. Transformation does not happen overnight. But it starts the moment you stop seeing yourself as a defect and start seeing yourself as history. The chronic loneliness that was born of childhood emotional neglect doesn't have to be your permanent identity. She was an answer. And answers can be updated. Getting out of emotional invisibility requires courage. Courage to occupy space, to say "I feel," to set limits, to admit needs. The emotionally neglected child had to adapt to survive. The conscious adult can choose to express themselves in order to live. This is where self-compassion stops being a beautiful concept and becomes a daily practice. When you learn to validate your emotions, break the cycle of insecure attachment, and begin an ongoing process of reparenting, the emotional void begins to be filled with presence. Real presence. It's not about never feeling lonely again, it's about not abandoning yourself when it appears. And it is from this new relationship with yourself that the true connection with the world is born. If you've made it this far, maybe something inside you has been touched. Perhaps you have recognized children's emotional neglect in their own history. Perhaps you have realized that chronic loneliness that seemed normal has deeper roots. And I ask you, sincerely, how long will you continue to treat your childhood wounds as if they were weakness? What if, instead of repeating the narrative of low self-esteem, you started a different movement today? How about naming your emotions this week? How about practicing self-compassion when you make mistakes? How about observing your patterns of insecure attachment without judging yourself? Emotional healing doesn't start with big revolutions, it starts with small, consistent acts of presence. You weren't an emotionally neglected child because it was too hard. You became strong because you had to. But now you don't have to survive anymore, you can learn to live. You can rebuild your identity, break cycles, practice reparenting, and get out of emotional invisibility. So I leave you with one last question: who can you become when you stop abandoning yourself? If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we transform knowledge into consciousness and consciousness into real change.